The sun set slower in the valley of Carryon Reach, as if God himself hesitated to cast darkness over a place so foul. The town squatted in the middle of a dry basin, hemmed in by black mesas that loomed like ancient, crumbling sentinels. Salt flats stretched in every direction, their cracked white surfaces resembling bleached bones scattered by some forgotten hand. The land itself felt heavy, a restless grave where bad men came to vanish and worse things came to feed. Carryon Reach was no town meant for honest living. The crooked sign above the saloon door swung lazily in the wind, its paint faded, the word mercy long since flaked away. Mangy hounds skulked between buildings, noses low, eyes wary. The only waterhole stank of rot, thick with floating scum. Wind howled through the old grave markers on the hill, rattling loose wood and bones beneath the hard-packed dirt. No law came here. No preacher stayed long enough to plant a sermon. No marshal worth his badge dared cross into the basin. Carryon Reach belonged to one man, Lorne Kadock. He was a tall, ash-skinned figure with a shock of hair the color of storm clouds. His left hand was always hidden beneath a black glove, though no one in town knew if it was deformity or something worse. His eyes were pale, the kind of dead blue that made a man feel cold when they met his gaze. He spoke little and smiled even less, a merchant of flesh, sorrow, and suffering. Gold was his gospel, and in Carryon Reach, what his coin couldn't buy, his men took. By late afternoon, a heavy hush had fallen over the town. Folk stayed inside, shuttered their windows, and cursed softly when the dogs began to whine. A storm wasn't coming. Something else was. At the far edge of the basin, just where the salt flats turned to scrub and rock, a woman stood bound to a weathered post. Hands lashed tight, dust caking her skin, dark hair matted and tangled. Her name was Elia Vaughn, though no one in Carryon Reach cared to ask it. They said she stole from Kadock, a lie, one of many. No one in that valley believed she was guilty, but no one would raise a hand to stop it either. When Kadock's men came for you, it wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about power. A few townsfolk gathered near the saloon, watching from the shadows like nervous scavengers. Faces sunken, skin leathered from wind and hunger. A child clung to her mother's skirts, wide-eyed, while an old man spat into the dust. "Poor fool," someone murmured. "She'll be dead by morning," another answered. No one spoke louder than a whisper, not when the wolves had been seen. In Carryon Reach, wolves didn't wait for death to take the weak. They came as darkness fell, lean and ragged, with eyes like glass and teeth yellowed by bone. Some said they were drawn to this place by old blood spilled in the earth. Others claimed they were the restless dead, wearing the skins of beasts. Elia strained against the ropes, wrists raw. She wasn't the kind to weep or beg. Storm-gray eyes glared at the jeering crowd, daring anyone, to do something. No one moved. Kadock sat in a high-backed chair on the saloon porch, a glass of amber liquid sweating in his hand. His men lounged nearby, ugly men with broken noses and mean eyes, their laughter sharp as blades. Kadock himself didn't smile. He never needed to. A hush fell deeper when the wind shifted. Dust coiled, the temperature dropping as though the sun itself recoiled from Carryon Reach. It was then that someone spoke the name no sane man did after nightfall. The Pale Hawk. A hush of dread answered. The old wives' tale. The name they told children to hush them, or drunks to sober them. Legend said the Pale Hawk rode, when death took root in a place. No man had seen him and lived to tell the same story twice. Sometimes he was a ghost, sometimes a soldier, sometimes a devil on a gray horse. He came for the wicked, or for the lost, or perhaps both. In Carryon Reach, his name was a curse. Kadock's lip curled. Ghost stories for children, he spat. But an old prospector near the well crossed himself. They say he don't come for the dead. He comes for the dying. The sun hung low now, bleeding red across the mesas. Wolves howled, nearer this time. The dogs in town shrank against walls, whimpering. Elia's head snapped up. In the distance, beyond the salt flats, a figure on horseback moved, slow, steady, alone. Cloaked against the wind, hat pulled low. She recognized no face, but something in her blood knew. A name whispered like an old scar under her breath. Not a ghost. A reckoning. The valley of Carryon Reach swallowed the last of the light, and somewhere out there, the pale hawk rode. The ropes bit deep into Elia Vaughn's wrists, coarse hemp scraping flesh raw with every movement. The post she was tied to was little more than a sun-bleached stake, a dead thing driven into dead earth. Blood crusted on her knuckles from earlier struggles, but her eyes, gray as a storm-racked sky, held no give in them. If anything, the growing dark seemed to sharpen the fury in her gaze. Elia Vaughn wasn't a simple damsel, and she sure as hell wasn't born for dying like this. Once, not so long ago, she'd ridden the freight routes through shale canyons and the Powder Rim, scouting for broken roads and river crossings no sane man would risk. She'd outpaced stampedes, fought off night-born raiders, and crossed lands where the maps turned white with warnings. Men called her storm-eyed and swore she was touched by some old frontier god for the luck she carried, though it was less luck than sheer cussedness and a knack for reading bad country like scripture. Fragments of those days clung to her now in the dark. She remembered the heat of saddle leather, the whistle of wind through canyon gaps, a toothless old woman in Drabone Bluff who once told her, "Girl, you'll live long enough to see death's face, and you'll spit in its eye." Elia intended to do just that. The townsfolk had gathered again now, clustered in the shadows like vultures too cowardly to peck, while she breathed. Their faces sagged from hunger and old fear, eyes darting toward the salt flats, where dusk bled across the land like spilled ink. Some wagered coins on how long she'd last. Others cursed under their breath for the trouble her death might bring. Not one of them would cut her down. "Hope the wolves chew you slow," a toothless rancher spat. Elia tilted her head, spat blood and dust at his feet. "Hope one takes your throat in your sleep," she shot back, voice raw but steady. A few of the men chuckled nervously, shifting on their heels. It wasn't bravery. It was the sour thrill of watching someone else's end. And then the wolves came. They appeared from the dark like shapes peeled from the land itself, gaunt bodies slipping between rock and salt weed, fur patchy, bellies drawn tight against rib cages. The old tales called them wolves, but these were something fouler. Their glassy eyes reflected no firelight, only the emptiness of the basin. Teeth like splintered bone jutted from their narrow jaws, mouths forever open in slavering hunger. Elia didn't flinch. She bared her own teeth. A low, warbling howl rose from the flats, and more answered, the sound curling in the air like smoke. The pack fanned out, moving closer to the boundary where the flat earth met brittle grass. The townsfolk shifted uneasily. One man dropped his cup with a dull clatter. "Reckon that's close enough," someone muttered, though no one moved to intervene. Not with Kadock, sitting like a stone idol on the saloon porch, watching with those dead blue eyes. He lifted his glass, drained the last of it, and gestured lazily toward the wolves. "Let's see what she's made of," he murmured. The wind turned then sharp, cold, strange. It carried no scent of rain, only a dry, old stink like a grave opened under moonlight. The horses tied to rails stamped and snorted, tugging at reins. Dogs whimpered and bolted under porches. A silence settled over the street. And then, from beyond the edge of town, something approached. It was no trick of the dying light. A figure rode from the salt flats, slow and sure, a gray horse picking its way across the cracked earth. The rider wore a tattered cavalry cloak, its folds stained by dust and time. A wide brimmed hat shaded his face, though the glow of dusk painted his outline in tones of pale gold and ghostly blue. He moved like a thing made of dusk, neither hurried nor hesitant. Not a man, not a spirit, but something in between. Someone in the bar saw him first, a lean tracker with a whiskey glass halfway to his lips. His hand froze. His throat worked. "Jesus, that's him," he breathed. The room went still. An old prospector, beard like a dry bramble bush, grabbed the man's wrist. "You seen the hawk before?" The tracker swallowed. "Not and lived, no." Someone else muttered, "That's just a rider, ain't no ghost." The prospector shook his head. "Ain't about ghosts. It's about reckonings." Out in the street, even Kadock's men shifted on their heels. The wolves, damn them, had paused too, slinking back a step, their heads low, tails flicking. They felt it. Animals always did. Elia, still bound to the post, saw him through strands of her dust-caked hair. She didn't know his face. Or maybe she did. A memory half buried in a fever dream from long ago. A figure standing over a burning camp, saber drawn, eyes like distant ice. The rider's gray horse came to a halt. The man didn't dismount, didn't speak. He simply sat there, watching, his presence heavy as the falling night. The wolves growled. Kadock stood at last. "You'd best ride on, stranger," he called, voice hard. The rider didn't answer. Another wolf lunged, a streak of dark fur and bone. Elia jerked against her bonds, her face lit not by fear, but by defiance. Teeth bared, she snarled at the beast as it rushed in. The moment stretched long enough for the world to hold its breath. And then the beast halted, mere feet away, lowering its head, whining as though some leash of death itself had tugged it back. The wind shifted again. The rider turned his horse a fraction toward Kadock, cloak rippling like a storm cloud caught on the earth. Kadock's men gripped their guns. The town held its breath. And Elia, still tethered, spat one last time into the dust. Whatever was coming, she intended to meet it standing. The figure rode in slow, the hooves of his gray horse making no sound on the brittle earth. The gathered townsfolk watched him cross the threshold where the edge of the firelight met the darkness, the wolves slinking low and growling, but not daring to charge. The man was close now, close enough for the flicker of flame to catch the frayed hem of his tattered cavalry cloak, to glint off the hilt of a saber sheathed at his side. He pulled the reins and dismounted, boots striking the ground with the weight of a coming storm. The wind seemed to lean away from him, carrying a sharp, metallic scent. He stepped forward, his shadow swallowing the flickering ring of firelight, and when he spoke, his voice rolled through the town like distant thunder. "Untie her, or feed yourselves." It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. The words hung there in the stillness, thick as blood. Kadock laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that cracked the tension, though even his men's chuckles came late and hollow. "Well now," Kadock drawled, stepping down from the saloon porch, glass still in hand. "Ain't this a bit theatrical? You come riding in all cloak and riddles, thinking you can wag your finger at me in my own damn town." His men chuckled, but it was forced. A bead of sweat crept down one of their temples. A hand trembled around the grip of a Colt. The stranger said nothing, his face still hidden beneath the shadow of his broad-brimmed hat. He moved forward another step, the wolves pacing at the edge of the circle, uneasy, watching not Elia now, but him. Elia's eyes narrowed. Something about the voice, the way the dust rolled with him. She fought the memory, a jagged thing at the edges of thought. A campfire, blood in the sand, men weeping in the dark, a rider with eyes like frostbitten stone. The stranger turned slightly toward her as though feeling her gaze. "Name yourself," Kadock demanded, voice roughening now. The figure tilted his head, and the firelight caught the edge of his face. Pale, weathered, eyes like frost against a dead sky. "Calder Holt," he said. The name slid into the air like a blade. A few of the older townsfolk stiffened. One man made the sign of the cross. Another turned and quietly slipped away into the dark. Kadock sneered. "Never heard it." The old prospector by the well croaked. "I have." Kadock shot him a glare. "You shut your mouth." But it was too late. The words were out. Elia felt the memory snap into place like a trap sprung. Calder Holt, a name spoken in whispered warnings by firelight. A soldier once, long ago, who led a company into the Black Canyons during the War of the Border. Men said he'd marched 90 riders into those cursed lands, hunting bandits and rebels. None came back but him. And when he did, he was changed. A man who came back alone from cursed lands was no man at all. They'd hanged him for mutiny, or tried. The stories forked there. Some claimed the rope broke. Others that his body swung for 3 days and never cooled. Some said he made a deal in the canyons, a pact with the old things buried under stone and sand. And now here he stood, in Carryon Reach. Kadock's bravado faltered for the briefest moment. Then he gestured sharply. "Gut him." His men surged forward, for in total, grizzled cutthroats armed with knives and pistols. But Calder Holt didn't draw his saber. Not yet. The first man lunged, Bowie knife gleaming. Holt's hand snapped out, seizing a spur from his own boot, and with a flick of his wrist, the jagged metal spun through the air, burying itself deep in the man's throat. He dropped soundlessly. The second came fast, club raised. Holt stepped aside, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted with a crack like snapping bone. The club clattered to the ground. Holt's elbow shattered the man's jaw, and the follow-up knee drove him into the dust. The other two paused, that fatal hesitation of men unready for what they faced. Holt finally drew his saber. It wasn't regulation anymore. The blade had been modified, blackened steel, the edge lined with notches like teeth. Its grip was bound in leather, so dark it seemed to drink the firelight. He moved with terrible economy. The saber licked out, carving across one man's chest, spilling him into the dirt. The last tried to run, but Holt was upon him, a boot crashing down on the back of his neck, driving his face into the dust. For dead before a breath could be drawn. The wolves watched, snarling low, but held their distance. Their hunger warred with a primal fear older than instinct. The onlookers froze, no one daring a sound. Elia stared at the stranger with a fierce, terrible awe. Kadock's face darkened, his hand twitching toward his holster, but he hesitated. The wind stirred again. Elia's mind tumbled back to that story. The whispers of Holt and his doomed company. The black canyons where voices rose from the sand, where men saw their deaths walking beside them. Holt had returned with his company's bones buried in cursed earth. Something old and cruel riding with him from those depths. That something still walked with him now. Elia spoke through cracked lips. You made a deal. Holt's eyes met hers, pale and inhuman. A debt, he said softly, paid in blood. He turned back to Kadock. The air thickened, the scent of dust and old bones rising. This town's done, Holt said, and Kadock, for the first time in years, felt fear bleed through his chest. The dust hadn't yet settled when the surviving townsfolk scattered like rats from a burning barn. No one dared linger in the street. Men who only minutes before had wagered on Eli's death now tripped over themselves to dive behind walls and through doors. The wolves didn't chase them. They held their ground at the town's edge, eyes like dead coins in the dark, watching Calder Holt. The firelight flickered, catching the gleam of the saber in his hand. Blood clung to its blackened edge, and the air hung thick with the copper tang of it. Holt stood a long moment over the fallen bodies of Kadock's men, as if weighing something in the marrow of his bones. Then he turned to Elia. Without a word, he stepped forward and drew a long hunting knife from his belt, slicing through the ropes that bound her wrists and ankles. The coarse hemp fell away. Her skin burned where it had rubbed raw, but she barely felt it. Her eyes never left his. "Why?" she rasped, voice cracked and low. Holt didn't answer immediately. He reached out, offering a steady hand, and when she took it, he pulled her to her feet. The wolves stayed where they were, the world holding its breath. She tried again. "Why come back here? After all this time?" He met her gaze, his own pale and unreadable. A flicker of something ancient moved in them, something that didn't belong to men. "A debt to pay," Holt said. "A promise made." Before she could press him further, a sound broke the stillness, the faint creak of a door, the soft clatter of boots on old wood. From the shadows of the saloon's porch came a shuffle of movement. Kadock, his face twisted and pale, hand clutching a rifle to his side. You don't know what you're doing, Holt," he spat. His voice was thick with fear, but he kept it loud enough to carry. "You break this, you'll damn us all." Holt's gaze cut to him, still a stone. "You damned yourselves long before I came." Kadock's jaw worked, but no words came. And then, as if something broke inside him, he let out a bitter, desperate laugh. "It was never meant to last this long," Kadock muttered. "Not since my granddaddy's time. Carryon Reach weren't built on honest earth. This place, it's built on blood." Elia tensed beside Holt. The old suspicions, the stories travelers spoke in hushed voices around distant campfires. Here was their truth. "What are you talking about?" Elia demanded. Kadock's gaze darted to her, then to the dark behind Holt. His voice dropped, thick with old sin. There was a town here once, long before Carryon Reach. A good place. Folk worked the land, raised families, until my people came for their gold. His eyes gleamed, sick with memory. Slaughtered every last one. Women, children, even their dogs. Left them in the flats, buried them under the salt, and called it clean. But it weren't clean. Blood soaks the earth, you see. It seeps into bone, into wind. You can't bury what don't want to stay down. Elia's stomach turned. The wolves. Kadock gave a bleak nod. They ain't wolves, girl. Never were. Revenants. The spirits of the ones we butchered. The land called to them, shaped them into beasts so the living wouldn't recognize their dead. But we knew. Oh, we knew. And so a pact was struck. His voice wavered, and he glanced nervously at Holt. Each generation a blood offering. One poor soul left for the wolves. Keeps the dead at bay. Keeps the salt flats quiet. Keeps Carryon Reach standing. It was the only way. Elia reeled, fury and horror twisting in her gut. And this time, it was supposed to be me. Kadock didn't answer, but the guilt in his face was answer enough. Holt's voice was low, cold as the bottom of a dry well. Not anymore. Kadock's shoulders slumped. If you break the pact, they'll rise, Holt. All of them. Not just the wolves. The ones in the salt. The ones in the hills. The land itself. I know, Holt said, even as the words left his lips. A gathering of old men crept from the gloom. Faces wrinkled and hollow. Eyes milky and clouded. The town elders. Feeble in body, but thick with the knowledge of old, rotten bargains. One of them, skin like old parchment, stepped forward. Called to Holt. The elder wheezed. We remember you. Holt's gaze didn't waver. You should. The elder wrung his hands. We warned your father what the land was. Told him not to bring his soldiers here. Told him it was cursed. You came anyway. You saw what lives beneath the flats. I did. Then you know what'll happen if the offering's denied. The elder pleaded. The dead'll rise, and the land'll swallow us whole. The salt'll bleed. The sky'll turn black. End this, Holt. Keep the pact. We'll find another, someone else. Enough, Holt said, voice final. The elder shrank back. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the low growls of the wolves and the wind moving like a breath across the dead flats. Elia looked at Holt. What are you going to do? Holt raised his eyes to the hills, to the long-forgotten graves, to the black mesas that hunched against the horizon. The air had thickened, charged like the moment before lightning split a storm-heavy sky. I'll end it, he said. The elder shook his head, despair in his voice. You can't fight the dead. Holt turned his gaze on him, a terrible, quiet fire there. Then let them rise. The wind howled louder now, a voice not of weather, but of something ancient and ravenous, rising from the salt flats. The wolves, gaunt and glint-eyed, gathered in a wide ring around Carryon Reach. Their forms shimmered as if made of mist and memory, some half-wolf, half-man, others carrying the faces of long-dead folk twisted in rage. The earth itself shuddered, a low rumble beneath booted feet. Elia stood beside Calder Holt in the dying light, blood drying on her face, her wrists raw but steady. The knife Holt had pressed into her palm felt heavier than its weight. A battered repeater hung from her shoulder. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere left to go. The land itself was waking. From the hollow of the saloon's porch, Kadock gathered his remaining men, the old elders clustering behind him like brittle shadows. Rifles and knives were raised with trembling hands, but no bravado remained in their faces, only the pale, desperate shine of men staring down the end of their line. The wolves howled, and the land split open, not in jagged chasms or shattering earth, but in a slow, deliberate rising. From the salt flats, figures emerged, not corpses, but shapes formed of ash and bone dust, their eyes glinting like frost. They moved within the wolves, beside them, part of them. Old townsfolk slaughtered generations past, faces slack with grief and rage. Carryon Reach's buried sins made flesh once more. God help us, one man whispered, his rifle lowering. No God left here, Holt murmured. Then the storm broke. With a cry like a breaking sky, the wolves charged. Holt moved first, a blur of motion as his saber flashed in the gloom, cutting through revenant and man alike. Elia fired into the mass, the recoil hammering her shoulder. Each shot a desperate ward against the tide. The wolves struck Kadock's line. Men screamed. Blades clashed. Blood soaked the dust. Kadock himself met Holt head-on, raising a long hunting knife. "This town dies with me, Holt," he roared, swinging wildly. The blade caught Holt's side, drawing blood dark, too dark. Holt didn't so much as flinch. His saber caught Kadock's wrist, severing it clean. The older man staggered, screaming, clutching his ruined arm. "You were always the coward," Holt growled, and drove the blade into Kadock's chest. The old man fell, blood darkening the earth. The elders tried to flee, their thin voices begging, bargaining with the rising dead. It bought them nothing. The shades fell upon them, howls and mist twisting around brittle bones. Elia fought close to Holt's side, ducking a slashing claw, burying her knife into the throat of a revenant that wore the face of a girl no older than 15. The thing shrieked, crumbling to dust. A shape lunged behind Holt, one of Kadock's last surviving men, his eyes wild with desperation, a jagged blade raised high. "Behind you!" Elia shouted. Holt half-turned, too slow. Elia fired. The shot caught the man square in the head, dropping him in a heap. Holt met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Gratitude and sorrow. The tide of dead seemed endless, but for everyone they felled, more rose. The wolves circled, snarling, their eyes reflecting the same dead, ancient blue that flickered in Holt's now. She saw it clearly then. Not fully man, not any longer. His face streaked with blood, but his eyes, those eyes. "You're one of them," she whispered. "I'm what they made me," he answered, voice graveled and low. "The last of my company. Bound to this place. Bound to end it." The land trembled again, a deep pulse from the salt flats. Holt raised his saber one final time. "I can stop this," he said, "but it won't let me come back." Elia's throat clenched. "Then don't go." He gave a faint, sad smile. "I made a promise." Without waiting for reply, he turned and strode toward the heart of the salt flats. The wolves parted before him. The revenants followed. The earth cracked at his passing, the wind screaming now, the sky dark and churning. Holt raised his arms, and the dead came to him. Revenants poured from every corner of Carryon Reach, wolves dissolving into mist, bones and dust streaming toward him. His body drank them in, shoulders bending beneath the weight of 100 murdered souls. The sky cracked, a jagged thread of light. And then, in the moment between night and dawn, Holt vanished into the salt. The ground swallowed him whole. The wind died. The wolves were gone. And for the first time in living memory, silence fell over Carryon Reach. Elia stood alone in the bloodstained dust, her knife still in hand, the repeater's chamber empty. Around her, nothing but the emptiness of dead earth. The town was hollow now, its houses empty shells. The dead had claimed their due. And then came the dawn. Light spilled over the mesas, painting the salt flats in pale gold. The town's stink seemed to lift. The air felt clean. Elia knelt, pressing a palm to the earth where Holt had vanished. There was no marker, no stone, only dust. "Rest, soldier," she whispered. In the years that followed, Carryon Reach vanished from maps. Travelers avoided the valley, and those who spoke of it did so only in taverns thick with smoke and whiskey. They told of a cursed town swallowed by its sins, of a pale rider who came from the dusk to settle old debts, and of a woman with storm-gray eyes, who walked out of the valley of the damned when no one else would. A new legend was born, and on restless nights, when the wind rolled cold through the high mesas, some swore they saw a figure on a gray horse, riding the flats, eyes like dead frost, carrying the storm with him still.